Have you ever wondered why the kindest people you know are often the most exhausted, the most taken advantage of, the most emotionally drained? Why those with the biggest hearts seem to attract the most heartless people? Why your compassion has become a magnet for those who would exploit it without a second thought? You were taught that kindness is always a virtue, that giving is always noble, that helping others is the highest calling of human existence. But what if that beautiful teaching was actually a sophisticated trap designed to keep you powerless? You've spent your life believing that good people give endlessly, that caring individuals sacrifice themselves for others, that true love means putting everyone else's needs before your own. You've been conditioned to see selflessness as the ultimate virtue and self-care as the ultimate sin. Every time you set a boundary, you felt guilty. Every time you said no, you felt selfish. Every time you prioritized your own well-being, you felt like you were betraying some sacred code of human decency. And in this internal war between your needs and your conditioning, your needs always lost. The result? You became a walking buffet for emotional vampires, a 24-hour emergency service for people who never once returned the favor. A therapy session that never ends, a shoulder that's always available, a heart that's always open for business. You gave your time to people who wasted it, your energy to people who drained it, your love to people who took it for granted. You became so available, so accommodating, so endlessly giving that you forgot the most important person in your life, yourself. Viktor Frankl, the psychiatrist who survived the Nazi concentration camps and went on to revolutionize our understanding of human motivation, discovered something profound about the nature of meaning and suffering. He realized that suffering becomes unbearable, not when it's intense, but when it's meaningless. And that's exactly what happened to your kindness. It became meaningless suffering because you gave it away indiscriminately, without wisdom, without boundaries, without any regard for whether the recipient deserved it or would honor it. You turned your kindness into a weapon against yourself. Every act of generosity that went unappreciated became a cut to your self-worth. Every sacrifice that went unnoticed became a blow to your sense of value. Every time you gave more than you received, you taught people that you were worth less than they were. You didn't just give them your time, energy, and resources. You gave them the message that you didn't matter enough to receive the same treatment in return. You trained them to see you as a service provider rather than a human being with needs and limitations. But here's what Frankl understood that most people miss. You always have the power to choose your response to any situation. You can't control how others treat you, but you can control how much access they have to your kindness. You can't force people to appreciate your generosity, but you can stop offering it to those who've proven they don't deserve it. You can't make someone reciprocate your care, but you can redirect that care toward people who will honor it, starting with yourself. The kindness that has been weaponized against you can be reclaimed, refined, and redirected. But it requires you to do something that feels almost impossible after years of conditioning. You have to get angry, not petty vindictive anger, but righteous anger at the injustice of how you've been treated. Sacred anger at how your beautiful heart has been exploited. Protective anger that says never again to those who would take advantage of your generous spirit. There's a playbook that emotional manipulators use, and you need to see it clearly to understand how your kindness was turned into their weapon. They didn't just accidentally stumble upon your generosity and decide to exploit it. They actively identified you as someone whose kindness could be weaponized, and then they ran a systematic campaign to ensure you would keep giving while they kept taking. First, they identified your kindness as a vulnerability rather than a strength. While healthy people see kindness and think, this person has good boundaries and chooses to be generous, manipulators see kindness and think, this person can be exploited. They looked at your caring nature and saw an opportunity. They noticed how you respond to guilt, how you cave to pressure, how you sacrifice yourself to avoid conflict. They catalogued your triggers like a hunter studying prey. Then they began the grooming process. Viktor Frankl wrote about how totalitarian regimes don't just oppress people through force, they create psychological conditions where people oppress themselves. The same thing happened to you. These manipulators didn't just take advantage of your kindness. They conditioned you to offer it more freely. They trained you to see their needs as urgent while your needs became optional. They taught you to feel guilty for having boundaries while feeling virtuous for having none. They used intermittent reinforcement, occasionally appreciating your efforts just enough to keep you hooked, but withholding consistent appreciation so you'd work harder for their approval. Like a slot machine that pays out just often enough to keep people pulling the lever, they gave you just enough positive feedback to maintain your addiction to their validation. When you gave, sometimes they were grateful, sometimes they were indifferent, sometimes they demanded more. This unpredictable response pattern created an obsession in you to keep trying, keep giving, keep hoping that the next act of kindness would finally be the one that secured their appreciation. They normalized taking from you while making you feel selfish for asking anything in return. They created a double standard where your generosity was expected, but their reciprocation was optional. They treated your time as free, but their time as precious. They acted as if your energy was unlimited, while their energy was carefully guarded. They behaved as if your emotions were less important than theirs, your needs less urgent than theirs, your pain less significant than theirs. Most insidiously, they convinced you that this imbalance was actually virtue on your part. They framed your endless giving as spiritual growth, your self-sacrifice as emotional maturity, your lack of boundaries as pure love. They made you feel proud of being used, noble for being exploited, enlightened for being drained. They turned your own kindness into a form of self-harm and convinced you it was the highest form of love. They also used your empathy against you by sharing their sob stories, their childhood traumas, their current struggles, not to create genuine connection, but to create obligation. They weaponized vulnerability, turning their pain into a crowbar to pry open your boundaries. Every time you tried to protect yourself, they reminded you of their suffering. Every time you attempted to create limits, they made you feel guilty for abandoning them in their time of need. They made their healing your responsibility while taking no responsibility for respecting your well-being. The most devastating part of this manipulation was how it made you complicit in your own exploitation. They didn't just take your kindness, they made you offer it more and more desperately. They didn't just ignore your needs, they made you feel ashamed for having them. They didn't just drain your energy, they made you feel guilty for being tired. They turned you into an active participant in your own emotional destruction, and then they blamed you for being weak enough to allow it. But Frankl discovered something powerful in the concentration camps. Even in the most oppressive circumstances, humans retain the freedom to choose their attitude and response. The manipulators in your life may have used your kindness as a weapon, but they can't take away your power to reclaim it. They may have exploited your generosity, but they can't prevent you from redirecting it toward people who deserve it. They may have weaponized your empathy, but they can't stop you from using that empathy to protect yourself from further harm. There was a moment when it happened. A specific point in time when you crossed the line from being a kind person to being an emotional slave. You might not remember it clearly because it felt so subtle, so gradual, so seemingly insignificant. But there was a moment when you made a choice that changed everything. You decided that their comfort was more important than your authentic feelings. Maybe it was when you first apologized for something that wasn't your fault just to end an argument. Maybe it was when you gave money you couldn't afford to someone who had never given you anything in return. Maybe it was when you canceled your own plans to accommodate someone who wouldn't do the same for you. Maybe it was when you listened to their problems for hours while swallowing your own pain to avoid burdening them. Maybe it was when you smiled and said, "It's fine," when it definitely wasn't fine, when every cell in your body was screaming that something was wrong. That moment was when you learned that your feelings didn't matter as much as their comfort, that your needs weren't as important as their desires, that your pain wasn't as significant as their convenience. You internalized the message that good people sacrifice themselves for others, that love means self-erasure, that kindness requires self-harm. And from that moment forward, you began the slow process of disappearing from your own life. Viktor Frankl understood that slavery isn't just about external chains, it's about internal surrender. It's about the moment when a person stops fighting for their own dignity and starts accepting degradation as normal. In the concentration camps, he witnessed how some people maintained their inner freedom even in the most oppressive circumstances, while others became psychologically enslaved even when their physical chains were removed. The difference wasn't in their external circumstances, it was in their internal choices about how to respond to mistreatment. You became emotionally enslaved the moment you started treating other people's emotional states as your responsibility to manage. When their anger became something you had to fix, their sadness something you had to cure, their stress something you had to absorb, you took on the impossible job of being responsible for everyone else's feelings while no one took responsibility for yours. You became a full-time emotional janitor, cleaning up everyone else's messes while your own emotional house fell into disrepair. The slavery deepened when you started changing your authentic responses to avoid their negative reactions. When you learned to smile when you wanted to cry, to agree when you wanted to argue, to give when you wanted to receive, you began editing your natural responses in real time, filtering everything through the question, "How will this make them feel?" instead of, "How do I actually feel about this?" You became a people-pleasing algorithm, constantly calculating the optimal response to maintain their approval and avoid their displeasure. But the final nail in the coffin of your freedom was when you started feeling guilty for having needs at all. When you began to see your own desires as selfish, your boundaries as mean, your self-care as self-indulgent. You didn't just prioritize their needs over yours. You started believing that you shouldn't have needs in the first place. You became ashamed of your own humanity, guilty for requiring the same consideration and care that you freely gave to others. This emotional slavery is particularly insidious because it masquerades as virtue. Society applauds the selfless giver, celebrates the endless supporter, rewards the person who never complains or demands anything in return. You received positive reinforcement for your own emotional enslavement. People called you strong, caring, mature, understanding. They praised you for qualities that were actually symptoms of your own self-abandonment. They celebrated your kindness while enabling your exploitation. The tragedy is that true kindness can't exist in a context of slavery. When you give from obligation rather than choice, when you help from guilt rather than love, when you support from fear rather than generosity, it's not really kindness anymore. It's self-harm disguised as virtue. It's emotional self-destruction wrapped in pretty paper and tied with a bow. It's bleeding yourself dry while calling it love. Understanding exactly how your kindness was weaponized is crucial for reclaiming it. These people didn't just take advantage of your generosity randomly. They systematically converted your greatest strengths into instruments of your own destruction. They took the beautiful qualities of your heart and turned them into chains that bound you to their will. Your empathy became their emotional manipulation tool. They learned that sharing their problems would immediately activate your desire to help, your need to fix, your compulsion to heal. They discovered that the more dramatic their crisis, the more you would sacrifice to address it. So they began manufacturing crises, amplifying their struggles, presenting every minor inconvenience as a major catastrophe that required your immediate intervention. Your natural empathy, which should have been a bridge to meaningful connection, became a highway for them to drain your resources. If you're recognizing yourself in this pattern, if you're starting to see how your beautiful heart has been systematically exploited, then subscribe right now. Because what's coming next will show you exactly how to transform from victim to victor, how to reclaim your kindness and use it as the powerful force it was meant to be. Your guilt became their remote control. They figured out that certain words, phrases, and scenarios would trigger your guilt response and make you compliant. After everything I've done for you, I guess I'll just handle it myself. I thought you cared about me. Fine, forget I asked. These phrases weren't random expressions of frustration. They were calculated guilt bombs designed to bypass your rational thinking and go straight to your emotional compliance center. They learned to make you feel responsible for their feelings, guilty for their problems, and obligated to their needs. Your desire for harmony became their tool for avoiding accountability. Every time they did something hurtful and you chose to keep the peace rather than address it, you taught them that they could harm you without consequences. Your conflict avoidance became their get-out-of-jail-free card. They learned that all they had to do was escalate the situation slightly and you would back down to restore harmony. Your beautiful desire for peaceful relationships became their license to treat you poorly. Your forgiveness became their permission to repeat harmful behavior. Viktor Frankl wrote about the importance of meaning-making, but he never suggested that people should accept meaningless suffering indefinitely. Yet that's exactly what your forgiveness became, a meaningless cycle of harm and absolution that changed nothing. Every time you forgave without requiring change, without demanding accountability, without setting consequences, you sent the message that their harmful behavior was acceptable. Your forgiveness, which should have been a gift that restored relationship, became a trap that enabled abuse. Your loyalty became their guarantee that you would never leave, no matter how poorly they treated you. They counted on your commitment, your belief in working things out, your reluctance to give up on relationships. They knew that the worse they behaved, the harder you would try to fix things. They exploited your dedication to relationships by making those relationships increasingly one-sided while relying on your loyalty to keep you trapped in the dynamic. Your generosity became their entitlement program. What started as your free choice to give became their expectation that you would always give. They stopped feeling grateful for your generosity and started feeling entitled to it. They stopped reciprocating and started taking for granted that you would provide whatever they needed whenever they needed it. Your voluntary kindness became their assumed right, and any reduction in your giving was treated as a betrayal rather than a natural boundary. Your hope became their manipulation fuel. They learned that giving you just enough positive reinforcement would keep you hoping that things would change, that they would change, that the relationship would become reciprocal. They used your hope to keep you invested in a dynamic that was slowly destroying you. Every small improvement, every moment of appreciation, every glimpse of the relationship you wanted became evidence that you should keep trying, keep giving, keep hoping for a transformation that would never come. Most devastatingly, your love became their leverage. They learned that the depth of your care for them was directly proportional to how much you would tolerate from them. The more you loved them, the more you would excuse, overlook, forgive, and endure. They used your love as a measuring stick for how much they could get away with. Your love, which should have been honored and treasured, became the very thing that made you vulnerable to exploitation. But here's what Viktor Frankl understood that most people miss. Recognizing how you've been manipulated isn't about becoming bitter or closing your heart. It's about developing wisdom. It's about learning to give your kindness strategically rather than indiscriminately. It's about understanding that true love sometimes requires saying no, setting boundaries, and allowing people to experience the consequences of their choices. It's about reclaiming your power to choose who deserves access to your beautiful heart. The moment you decide to reclaim your weaponized kindness is both terrifying and liberating. It's terrifying because it means admitting that you've been complicit in your own exploitation, that your beautiful nature has been perverted into a tool of your own destruction. But it's liberating because it means you finally understand that you have the power to change everything, starting right now, with the very next choice you make. Reclaiming your kindness doesn't mean becoming cruel, cold, or indifferent to others' suffering. It means becoming strategic about how you express your care, selective about who receives your energy, and protective of the precious resource that is your generous heart. It means understanding that kindness without boundaries isn't kindness at all. It's self-harm, masquerading as virtue. The first step is acknowledging that your kindness has value, real, tangible value that should be treated with respect and reciprocated appropriately. Viktor Frankl discovered that meaning comes not from avoiding suffering, but from choosing your suffering wisely. Your suffering in relationships should serve a purpose, should move toward growth and connection, should create positive change. Suffering that goes nowhere, that changes nothing, that only enables others to continue harmful behavior. This is meaningless suffering that you have every right to refuse. You must learn to distinguish between people who are worthy of your kindness and people who will weaponize it. Worthy recipients of your kindness show appreciation, offer reciprocity, respect your boundaries, and grow from your support. They don't take your generosity for granted. They don't escalate their demands when you give, and they don't make you feel guilty when you can't provide what they want. They treat your kindness as the gift it is, not as the obligation they're entitled to. People who weaponize your kindness show the opposite patterns. They take your generosity for granted, escalate their demands when you give, make you feel guilty when you can't provide what they want, show no genuine appreciation for your efforts, offer no reciprocity for your care, and become angry or manipulative when you set boundaries. They treat your kindness as a weakness to exploit rather than a strength to honor. The sacred act of taking your power back requires you to become comfortable with disappointing people who have been enabled by your boundaryless giving. When you start saying no to unreasonable requests, when you stop dropping everything to manage their emergencies, when you refuse to sacrifice your well-being for their comfort, they will be disappointed, they will be angry, they will accuse you of changing, of becoming selfish, of not caring anymore. Let them. Their disappointment is not your responsibility to fix. You must also learn to trust your instincts about when something feels wrong in a relationship, even if you can't articulate exactly what it is. Viktor Frankl wrote about the importance of listening to your conscience as a guide to meaning and right action. When a relationship consistently leaves you feeling drained, frustrated, unappreciated, or resentful, your emotional system is giving you valuable information. Don't override these feelings with logical explanations about why you should continue giving. Your emotions are data, and the data is telling you that something is out of balance. Reclaiming your kindness means getting angry, not petty, vindictive anger, but righteous anger at how your generous spirit has been exploited. This anger isn't meant to be directed outward in attacks on others. It's meant to be fuel for protecting yourself going forward. It's the fire that burns away your tolerance for being mistreated. It's the energy that powers your commitment to never again allow your kindness to be weaponized against you. You must also practice what Frankl called tragic optimism, the ability to remain hopeful and caring while fully acknowledging the reality of human evil and selfishness. You don't have to become cynical to protect yourself. You can maintain your beautiful, generous heart while developing the wisdom to share it only with people who will honor it. You can stay open to love while becoming closed to exploitation. The most important part of this process is redirecting your kindness toward yourself with the same intensity you've shown others. You must become your own best friend, your own most devoted supporter, your own most protective advocate. Every ounce of care you've poured into others who didn't appreciate it should now be poured into your own healing, growth, and well-being. Every sacrifice you made for people who took it for granted should now be made for your own recovery and empowerment. When you truly reclaim your kindness, something magical happens. It becomes more powerful, not less. When you give from choice rather than obligation, from fullness rather than emptiness, from wisdom rather than naivety, your kindness has the power to genuinely transform lives, starting with your own. When you stop giving to everyone, you can give more meaningfully to the people who truly deserve it. When you stop being available to everyone, you become more present for the relationships that actually matter. This is your declaration of independence from the emotional slavery that has been disguised as virtue. This is your emancipation proclamation from the prison of boundaryless giving. This is your revolution against the forces that convinced you that your kindness was meant to be a weapon against yourself rather than a gift to be shared wisely. You don't owe your kindness to people who have proven they will abuse it. You don't owe your energy to people who drain it without reciprocating. You don't owe your forgiveness to people who haven't earned it through genuine change. You don't owe your loyalty to people who have betrayed your trust. You don't owe anything to anyone except yourself. And what you owe yourself is protection, respect, and the kind of fierce self-love that refuses to accept mistreatment in any form. Your kindness was never meant to be a weapon. It was meant to be a choice, a gift, a conscious expression of your beautiful heart offered to people worthy of receiving it. It was meant to create connection, not exploitation. It was meant to build relationships, not enable abuse. It was meant to spread love in the world, not drain it from your life. So take it back. All of it. Every ounce of care you've wasted on people who didn't appreciate it. Every moment of energy you've spent on people who wouldn't reciprocate it. Every drop of love you've poured into people who would never return it. Take it all back and give it to yourself first. Then share it only with people who will honor it as the precious gift it truly is. If this message has awakened something fierce and protective in you, if you feel that dormant strength stirring in your soul, then subscribe right now. Join the community of people who've learned to weaponize their kindness for good, starting with protecting themselves from those who would exploit their generous hearts. Write in the comments, "I take my kindness back." Let's see how many people are ready to stop being emotional slaves and start being strategic with their generosity. Let's count how many beautiful hearts are ready to stop bleeding for people who wouldn't bandage their wounds. Because your kindness is not a weapon to be used against you. It's a superpower to be wielded by you for purposes you choose, with people who deserve it. And the first person who deserves your kindness is you. Always you. First and foremost, you. Take it back, all of it. It was always yours to begin with.